Chapter 1. Sarvel was having the weirdest dream. It felt like he almost floated, wrapped in a cocoon of warmth and rich velvet softness. He was so comfortable that he couldn't fathom why any part of his brain wanted to be aware. Yet, at the same time, a small part of his mind screeched in alarm. He hummed to himself and tried burrowing into the softness a little more. Up! Ah, a voice is saying something. He wisely nodded to himself, still not truly awake. That is why his mind woke up, despite how comfortable he is. Loath to move, he seriously contemplated ignoring the voice and going right back into the deep depths of true sleep. Sarvel Sorpan, wake up right now! How odd. His head rang a little from that, but his ears didn't hear anything. Sarvel! In less than a heartbeat, Sarvel sat bolt upright in bed, scrambling for bed covers and trying to get both eyes open and focused. The glowing figure at the end of his bed did nothing to help him gather his scattered wits. There, in all of her frustrated glory, stood the goddess of light and protection. At this moment she clearly leaned toward her protection side, as she did not wear the airy white gown normally depicted in pictures, but instead dressed in thick metal armor from head to toe, a long sword strapped on her hip. Her long dark hair lay in a workmanlike plait over one shoulder, and the delicate crown normally on her forehead had been exchanged for a sturdy helmet. Her toe tapped in an irritated rhythm, staring at him through narrowed eyes. Sarvel could hardly do a proper bow while still in bed, tangled up in covers, but he did manage to find his tongue. Alejandra, how may I serve? Some of her irritation eased when he spoke. Sarvel Sorpan, my priestess has been locked away in the depths of Belthane Castle. You are to go rescue her and then stay with her, protecting her from any harm, until I release you. The alarm that he had felt, finding an angry god at the foot of his bed, tripled with her words. Someone dare to actually lock up your priestess? They'll do more than that in a few days' time, unless she caves to their demands, Alejandra informed him grimly, frown deepening the furrow between her eyes. She won't, though. She will die before doing anything those Drekks want her to. Sarvel, you have very limited time. I suggest moving tonight. He translated suggest to move or have lightning strike you without difficulty. This was not the time to point out that she was not his god, and that technically he didn't have to move when she ordered him to. Sarvel sensibly chose to live and said instead, I'll leave as soon as I can. Am I the only one you've called? No, there is one other. His name is Royalt, from Ramath. He'd met people from Ramath clan before. They were devout, certainly, but had interesting ideas of how a goddess should be worshipped. The fact that Alejandra was not, technically, their goddess just complicated matters even more. Hoping not to get his head bitten off with this question, he ventured, You've already spoken to him, then? She knew full well what he was truly asking, and her mouth quirked up slightly. He'll agree, even if I have to bash his full head in. You have 2 days to get her out, Sarvel. I can't guarantee her safety beyond that. Breaking into a castle as heavily fortified and guarded as Belthane in 2 days would be difficult at best. With just 2 men? Well, he'd say impossible if a god hadn't ordered him to do just that. I leave within the hour, he assured her. Good. About to turn and go, she paused and looked back to add, Don't take the main highway. Taking the back roads would lengthen the trip to Belthane by a good 2 hours, but Sarvel didn't even think to question her. I'll take the back way in. With a nod of approval, she disappeared, taking all of the light with her. Sarvel took a moment to breathe, and then he flung the covers off of him and dove for his pants. You want me doing what now? Alejandra sighed deeply. As a goddess, she was used to being obeyed without question. After all, she was a god, and what mortal would dare to argue with a god? Someone had obviously failed to teach him that. Royalt, stop arguing with me. The safety of your people depend on her safety. I ken, the irritable man snapped. Like everyone else at this time of the night, he had been deeply asleep when Alejandra had shown up at his bedside. Unlike Sarvel, who took the nightly summons in stride, Royalt awoke like a bear just yanked out of his winter hibernation. The wild snarl of dark hair around his head served as an excellent frame for his dark scowl. His thick brogue, already steep because of his northern heritage, became even more incomprehensible with his half-asleep tongue. "But what are you about, wanting me to guard her? I'm no pet guard dog!" Ramoth clansmen were known for being independent, Alejandra reminded herself impatiently. Her sister had made them that way on purpose. Give her a moment, and she might remember why Juvin had done such a thing. "You are the strongest in your clan, Ryalt. She needs the best, and you're it." Alejandra's voice hardened in warning. "Now get moving." Ramoths were stubborn and independent, but even they didn't cross certain lines. Ryalt grumpily backed down. "Fine. Where is she?" "Belthane Castle. You are to meet Sarvel Sorpan on the way there. The two of you will break her out and guard her. You have 2 days to get her out of there, remember." He nodded impatiently, already throwing back the covers and reaching for the clothes that had been flung over a chair mere hours before. Satisfied, Alejandra turned and left. There were other matters she had to attend to, now that this stubborn child was in motion. As she went to the next task, she finally remembered why Juvin had made the Ramoth so independent. She'd wanted at least one grace that would not serve her blindly. Did gods have moments of temporary insanity? Sarvel spent most of the next 2 hours thinking. He didn't find navigating the back roads mentally tasking in any way. His horse had the harder part of the job, trying to canter along whatever half-formed deer trail that the farmers used in these parts. If not for the very bright moon overhead, Sarvel wouldn't have dared anything more than a nice, plodding walk. Even as he focused on the road in front of him, a part of his mind couldn't resist trying to come up with some sort of plan. Plans are difficult to form when you don't have any real information. It wasn't until he was out here, in the cool night air, away from an upset goddess, that he realized he really didn't know much. In fact, he only knew 3 things. A Ramathan would be joining the rescue operation, the priestess was a political prisoner, and she was in Belthane Castle. What Sarvel didn't know could fill up a thick book, starting with where on earth he and the Ramathan were supposed to meet, or even if a meeting place had been set up for them, and going downhill from there. Well, a Ramathan shouldn't be too hard for him to find in Thornok. The typical Ramathan clansman stood a good head taller than a Thornok citizen, and dressed quite differently. Thornok prided itself on dressing in very fine material and looking very civilized at every moment. A Ramathan didn't care what his clothes looked like as long as they could blend in with his environment, were durable, and fit well. Sarvel had heard people dismiss Ramathans as barbarians, but he thought of them as more of a practical, rugged people. Considering who their neighbors were to the north, he certainly didn't blame them for being a little rough around the edges. It probably fell to him to spot his new ally. Considering that Sarvel was Brenian, he would blend in fairly well in Thornok. Well, doubtless the Thornoks wouldn't think so, as they leaned more towards politics and scholarly pursuits than business. But Sarvel came from merchant stock, and he always dressed well. A well-dressed employee, his father always claimed, was the best advertisement that a merchant could have. "All right," he mused to himself. "If I were a Ramoth, jerked awake in the middle of the night by an angry goddess, which route would I take?" Alas, not the one that he was on. The Ramoth clan sat to the north of his people's territory. There was one of 2 major highways that the Ramathan might choose, one coming from the very north that went directly toward Thornok, the other that came from a more easterly approach and led more toward Bryn. She told me to avoid the major roads. Did she tell him the same? Arg! The more he thought on this, the more confusing it became. He just didn't know enough to make any educated guesses. Should he even be depending on the Ramathan to show up tonight anyway? They were a notoriously independent people, and Alejandra wasn't even his clan's goddess. Alejandra might spend the whole night arguing him into moving. Sarvel blew out an irritable breath. The road split in 2 very different directions soon, so he had to make a choice. East or west? West would take him the more direct route to Belthane. East would take him more toward Ramoth. West, he finally decided, just in time to turn onto the left branch. I'll act as if I'm the only chance this poor woman has for rescue, and hope the Ramathan joins me at some point. Surely the goddess will guide one or the other of us so that we'll meet. Odd. Why did that sound like wishful thinking, even in his head?